In the second part of Lesson 6-7, we're going to look a little more in depth at inverse relations and their functions. So let's start with finding the inverse of a function. They want us to find the domain and range of both functions, and then tell if the inverse is a function. So let's start with the original one, stating the domain and the range. Remember, I have a square root, so the radicand cannot be less than 0. So stating my domain, x has to be greater than or equal to -7. If it's less than -7, that'll give me a negative inside the radical. For the range, the principal square root is non-negative, so the number y greater than 0 must make up the range. Y greater than 0 or equal to. Now let's find the inverse. F of x is the same thing as saying y equals square root of x plus 7. I'm going to switch the x and y around. To get y by itself, I first need to square both sides. So x squared is y plus 7. I'll then subtract 7, which gives me my inverse function. Y inverse is x squared minus 7. To find my domain, there is no square root involved. There's no fraction involved. So the domain of this inverse is all real numbers. For my range, this is x squared minus 7. That means my vertex has moved down 7 units. So y has to be greater than or equal to -7. Is the inverse relation a function? Yes, it is. I don't have a plus or minus involved. For every one x I pick, I get one single y value. So the inverse is a function. And so let's move on to the next example. We're going to do problem 6, composing inverse functions. That means we're going to do the composite of an inverse function. The first thing I need to find is what is the inverse of f. So remember that -1 means the inverse function. F of x is the same thing as y, so y equals 4x plus 8. Let's reverse the x and y around. X is equal to 4y plus 8. Go ahead and push pause and find out what the inverse function is, and then resume to check your answer. The inverse function that I got was x minus 8 over 4. I cannot cancel just the 8 and the 4 because x minus 8 is my entire numerator. If you want to, you can split this into two different fractions. You can take 1/4 x and then minus 2, which is 8 over 4. Either one is just fine. Now to use this as a composite function, this is telling me to use the 5 in place of x for the inverse function. So I'm going to take that inverse and substitute 5 into the equation. So instead of x minus 8 over 4, it's 5 minus 8 divided by 4. 5 minus 8 is -3 over 4. So for it being a composite function, I then take that value I came up with, and I'm going to put it into the original function. So I'm going to go f of -3/4. And my original function was y equals 4x plus 8. So y equals 4 times negative 3 over 4 plus 8. The 4's cancel. I have negative 3 plus 8, which is 5. My final answer is 5. And that concludes the second portion of Lesson 6-7.